Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of Spiritual Shadowboxing. I think we're up to number 12 today.
Yes.
Our guest is Sean Nanavati. He's a former professor and child psychologist, founder of Mindwell Labs, and most recently, the author of a book called The Art of Attention. Sean, thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're excited to talk to you. There's so many interesting things that you're doing. Tell us a little bit about the book and the mobile app that you were telling us about that kind of helps with the application of these things.
Yeah, so the book is called The Art of Attention. It's a translation of an ancient Indian text. It's the first book of the Yoga Sutra, actually. But the first book of the Yoga Sutra is not really about stretching. It's very much about the mind and creating a construct of attention. And with it really is a whole system of psychology. And it's not that it is something from the ancient past, but I think for American psychology, it's the future. That's kind of the things we're building now are based on this model of psychology.
And what about the mobile app that you were talking about?
Yeah, so we have right now it's like a watch app, like an Apple Watch app. It's called right now you can download it now on the watch. It's called the Attention Quotient. Like you have an intelligence quotient, you have an IQ. Now we've introduced this idea of an attention quotient. So you have an AQ. And my experience, I found many intelligent people will do stupid things. Their attention is in the wrong place, right? So I think your attention quotient is also as valuable as your intelligence, probably more valuable than your intelligence, right? Because it's where you direct your intelligence.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating this already because I do believe in sort of the high performance life, which is like priorities, values, and focus, and how that translates for me as radical discipline, right? It doesn't sound like a fun phrase for a lot of people, but my life is fuller, deeper, and has more freedom because of that focus and discipline.
Yeah, I like how you said freedom, because there's this like paradox that comes from like through discipline you gain more freedom.
And it's people often think it's the opposite. When you hear radical, something like that, your first instinct is, "Ooh, that sounds very challenging. I don't know if I can dedicate my energies towards that." But it is a sense of freedom when you have your intention as part of. It's almost like in meditation. It's in your breath. That attention is like your breath, and the fact is where your attention goes, your mind goes.
Yeah, it's very connected. Like breath is both voluntary and involuntary. So you can bring your attention to your breath, but then when you're not paying attention to it, it follows, another rhythm, and that's most of your day, right? So what rhythm is it following when you're not paying attention to it? And can you program it to breathe in a certain way, even when you're not attending to it?
Yeah, I think about it.
It's really subtle. That's one of the things in the book that he talks about. But I think it's really a profound thought. I mean, really get into it and think about it. You're like, yeah, there is another way to think about the mind.
Yeah.
And I think this approach to the mind is it's actually much more scientific. The narrative in the West is that, these Eastern teachings are esoteric or mystical. And between the lines, they're like, it's, quote unquote, non-rational. So we don't have these techniques in our hospitals or in our schools or the places where we really need them. They're not covered by insurance. They're recreation. But if you actually sit down and see what they're talking about, if you understand that Patanjali, the original author, was a physician, and he's taking pulse diagnosis and he's coming up with a system of psychology based on a scientific measure, I think readers will come to the conclusion like, wow, this is actually more scientific. This is not, mystical or any of that. This is just a straight, better approach to what the mind is.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think about it in the context of like that paradox as an unconscious business leader, right? Like, so you own a small business and you think, wow, I own a small business and that gives me freedom because I'm the owner of this. I can set my own time, right?
Metaphor.
And what ends up happening is your attention is so unfocused, right? Like you're trying to get everything and anything done inside of a day. And what happens paradoxically because of that is you have no freedom whatsoever.
Exactly.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That comes with like multitasking as a small business
Right.
person. I'm guilty of multitasking. And I think, oh, I'm getting so much done, but I'm not really, getting as much as I think I am. Because my attention, again, is scattered. It's not focused um, for one project at a time.
Right. And that's the focus on like productivity versus taking the time, really creating a strategy, thinking like more mindfulness, more awareness, right?
Yeah. Planning is a great
Planning.
example of that. And also like how, one of the things I've noticed with this whole thing with attention is how you do certain things in a certain order
Mhm.
really matters. I remember one day I was with one of my friends who was having a music festival out in Colorado. And well, I was just gonna, anyway, he was setting this whole section up, and in the beginning they did this whole mindfulness class where everyone was, very meditative and quiet and, very doing things very carefully with attention. About halfway through, he's like, Sean, like we have a line that's like 50 people long, what's going on? And you go there and there's a guy making the sandwich one by one, like, what are you having, a hot dog? And you make it like with such loving kindness, but he had to make, there's a lot of people in line. He had to then go back and say, okay, wait a second, how many people want hot dogs? How many people want popcorn? How many people want veggie dogs? Okay, and then put 6 on at a time,
Right.
And so it was like, to me, was a good point because it was like, not just how you do it, but like planning it. If you do things a bunch at a time, you can do them, way quicker and still be mindful.
Right.
And there's another level to it.
Yeah, I feel like the return on investment in what you're talking about, the planning, that's like I plan my day, I plan my week, and I plan it according to my values and my priorities. And so those low value, low priority things are not going to get done by me. They're going to get done by someone else,
Yeah.
right? So I can focus on what matters to me. I think of, I don't know if it was a Lincoln quote that was like, if I have an hour to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend 45 minutes sharpening my axe. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I've never heard that before. That's great.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, actually, Sean, if you can, before we started recording, we were talking a lot about the youth and your experience and your background working with them. Maybe you can talk a little bit. We did pull the youth card earlier and the emotional cards.
My parent, I guess.
Huh?
Well, I've worked as a child psychologist, and I've taught child psychology. I worked at the Child Mind Institute. That was one of the main places I worked. I worked in neuropsychology. I did assessment. I've also worked as a therapist at Four Winds in Katona, not far from here.
Mhm.
And one thing one of the diagnoses I'd often see is ADHD. And, right now ADHD is also, before coronavirus, ADHD was the only epidemic in the United States. And even now with coronavirus, I think it's gotten worse. I think we're really seeing a psychiatric epidemic right now.
Yeah.
That is, it's maybe going to get worse, and it's partly everything that's happening in society, but it's also because we don't have a system of psychology that really works.
Mhm.
People come to rehab, they leave, and they die a couple of days later from an overdose. What was it's not working. Like what's happening is the philosophy underneath, I believe, is broken. I believe the whole DSM diagnostic system needs to go into this fire right here. Like I really see a lot of, it's not scientific, and it's often the projection of the person doing the diagnosis interferes with what is supposedly observed. So I don't want to go too much. I don't want to get on a soapbox, but in my experience, I really found that, eventually led for me to leave the field itself, even though I felt like I liked the field. It's felt that it led to like my own moral crisis. I feel like if someone needs a little bit more attention, you can train attention. You can teach people to be more attentive without giving them medication. And the age at which these kids are getting medications is now getting younger and younger and younger. Now it's all the way down to kindergarten.
Right.
And it's, these doctors hold shares in these companies at the same time. There's just a mess,
And I can relate to that, having left child psychology, just being like, this is not where I'm going to serve. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to have a kid just sitting there sharing what they're going through and put them on meds like that. That was 22 years ago. But for me, it was like, there's got to be a better way. And I have found through coaching and essentially teaching young people how to find their voice, and
Mhm.
trust their experience, that like I found the place where it seems to work, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
More transformative.
Holistic, transformative, not pathology based. It's like bullshit. You don't have ADHD. You don't really like math. That's okay. You
Yeah.
seem to be really
No,
engaged in
no,
listening
no
music.
teacher ever called me and was like, you know what? I am just boring as,
I
it was
feel,
always the kid who wasn't paying attention. It was
Right,
never
right.
the teacher that
yeah.
was boring, right?
And I actually was that kid. I felt incredibly underwhelmed in school and then overstimulated by sort of the social
Mm,
setting. So
mm.
it's like, well, I'm bullied on the social side. I'm underwhelmed by what I'm being taught. Of course, I'm staring out the window.
Right. And you know, speaking about that, and I've talked to other people, why can't we have a class on daydreaming? You know,
Yeah.
and
Dreaming.
you know,
Well, that's one of the
allowing it,
classes we're teaching now. That's
yeah,
next
There you
week. We're
go.
doing this class on dreaming itself.
yeah,
It's such
you
an
know,
incredible creative source of,
it really
and
is.
make it fun. Psychology can be fun. It's interesting to investigate the mind. And there's an aspect of the mind of freedom, and it's a frontier that we don't know a lot about. I would wish that these kids who come here gain that kind of excitement and then use that to investigate themselves and come to understand, how their attention works.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a skill like any other skill.
Hmm.
And part of that is also, I would say, happiness, right? Being happy is also a skill you can develop that comes with understanding how your attention works.
Yeah.
And so people are chasing happiness. This is going to make me happier. That, this person or this, this car or whatever. But
This
yeah,
relationship, everything, right?
yeah. Everyone says it over and over, but so it keeps happening. And so it's just the way our society is. But it's really a choice.
It
And,
is.
and okay, if you don't need anything, you're not in desire of anything. So if
That
you
comes
can,
back to the point of radical discipline that you were
Mhm.
talking about there. You know, the thing is, like, I know very few people that are happy all the time. I think I know two people that
Mhm.
just are happy, and I'm like, they have a happy gene. But the rest of us, I think it's a daily choice to be happy. And I think it's part of the attention, where you place
Yeah.
your attention.
And you can be, I don't think you have to be like happy, happy, joy all the time, but to have conscious awareness of what mood you're in and transforming that mood.
Yeah.
Like it's all right to be, I just went on a walk this morning. It was like a delicious melancholy. It was sad, but I was enjoying it. I liked that feeling in that moment. It was rainy, it was a little overcast. And that's also a kind of happiness.
I'm hearing the being with whatever comes up as a form of joy,
Mm.
allowing for whatever, warmly welcoming what's coming
Yeah,
in.
well, I'm like seeing it as a larger narrative, maybe. If you see your
Exactly.
life as an opera, then even the dramatic stuff is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said something before we started recording that I really loved, and you said your attention is a gift that you give to others.
I love that.
Um, and
Yeah.
it's great, and that does lead to happiness, right? Like giving in and of itself, I feel like that makes me happy. I'd love to give to other people.
Yep.
I did have to
Mhm.
fine tune that at some point
Mhm.
because I realized that there's a spectrum of giving where you're either doing it because it's authentic and it does make you inherently happy, or you're giving because you're trying to earn love from someone, right? So you have to self-regulate that. But now that I feel like I have maybe not past tense worked through it, but am actively working through that, I do believe that attention is absolutely a gift, because if people just want to be seen, heard, understood, valued, there's no greater gift than putting your attention on them, on what's important to them, right? Listening to them, seeing them. So yeah, I think, as some people might think that these are very disparate ideas, how could attention lead to happiness? But I think it's very clear, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's it's an active choice. It's a choice and if something's making you angry, you practice becoming angry, right? You become good at
Exactly.
anger. If you're
Yeah.
worrying a lot, you get good at being a worrier. It's like a neuroplastic idea as well.
Right.
Like wherever that mood is that you're cultivating, that is what you will become. That's your
Yeah.
karma. Like your character becomes your fate.
Exactly. Dr. Joe Dispenza says that quite a bit in his workshops. You become what
It's
you think,
terrifying.
right? And he talks about neuroplasticity of the brain and how the grooves just get kind of dug in because of the constant thoughts, the attentions of worry. I'm going to be, I'm going to be, a situation happens when you're 20, maybe a betrayal or whatever, but you get so like embedded in those emotions that you almost become addicted to that emotion. And I like to ask you this question because Dr. Joe says once you are addicted to those emotions, you unconsciously seek situations to bring the same feelings back. I mean, do you feel like there's some fidelity to that? I can't even talk, but
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's truth to that. I mean, that's psychological, like the repetition, they call it repetition compulsion, something like that. But it's, those are things yeah, they're painful emotions that we work through, but there's a process to work through them.
mm-hmm.
And it's all right to feel grief. It's all right to feel anger, but know that you're going through these steps in a way, and that you want to be free of that emotion at the end of it,
Right.
and that there's a way to go about to do that. So
Yeah,
if people talk about meditation, they think it's just about sitting there and being silent, but it's much more than that. It's about going inward and kind of, seeing what's going on within and being your own teacher. It's like when you have that feeling, you're like you're like a little child that is upset, but you can be your own parent as well, right? I don't think it's enough just to, I was a kid, I felt like a kid, so I acted out in a blind rage, and that's that. Well, okay, but you're not a kid anymore. You're also an adult, and so there's another part of you that needs to have some type of dialogue with the part that's a little bit upset.
Yeah.
Come to some resolution, still be childish, but also have, internalize your own teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's like the whole idea of reparenting and like reparenting oneself, and why that's so transformative, because you really do have to have your attention on what you're actually going through and like what your little kid, the small version of you is dealing with. But then also being that outside observer, right? To say, okay, well, let me name this. What am I actually going through? Let me sit in it. And then what do I need to reframe it? How can I reframe it so that I don't continue the pattern, right? And
Right,
so
exactly.
it's just changing the patterns. The attention, in my understanding, is like the attention is always there. It's just what you choose to put it on,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. And then they often say that memories without the emotional charge can become wisdom then.
Well, that's the clearing the emotional debris piece, right? Because we're talking about, I love the idea of like our presence and our ability to be presenced for others is a gift. But Kelly, I'm hearing you also say being present to ourselves and being with whatever comes up is quite transformative just unto
just
itself.
witnessing.
Yeah.
Yes.
These meditations they're like set in different places, as if you're in outer space, or things like that, where it's a little bit easier to create a little distance from where you may be in your day-to-day life, and then take a moment to re-examine, okay, what's happening internally? What am I feeling? And I think that's a really important part of meditation. And there's an emotional quality to it that I think has been completely dismissed, because really a lot of, I think, American meditation comes from Zen, and Zen meditation is much more detached from their emotions.
Right.
But the Indian meditation, you have Natya Shastra, you have Abhinavagupta, you have this great tradition in India of different meditation styles that are integrated with a theory of aesthetics or emotions. And so they're together. And I think that's a great teaching. And I think that when that type of meditation comes, you'll find that it's much more fun.
Yeah, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be healing to a country like ours in the terms of like, I think we have an emotional deficit problem more than anything. And so to be able to say, okay, let's get some emotional intelligence online. Let's really understand that our culture celebrates intellect and productivity and wealth, but now we're sort of anemic or underdeveloped on this other side, just imbalanced. Maybe that's a better word. and to learn how to cultivate a relationship with our emotions. I do think that that's the opposite of addiction, is our own connection with ourselves and then with others.
That's right. It's that self-love. It really
One
is.
of the, yeah, like this, one of these ideas is the idea of turning anger into heroism. And we used to, this is a technique, or one of the classes I used to give. And, you know, people come with anger, and even we would have almost like these charades when people would come in and they would be really angry, and they would partner with someone else. They would do this charade about play acting their anger. You could feel it, you could see it, viscerally how they felt, like, you know, but then they're not allowed to speak. They're just acting it out. But then they had to transform that into an action of heroism. And it was funny how people would do, you know, first they're just at each other angry, and then they're silently, eventually side by side, pointing to a shared goal. And that just, you know, no words at all. It's just the charades of the emotion. And you see how much of language is really just nonverbal, emotional, right? The words are almost the betrayal of the emotion, or
Yeah, I believe that too.
Yeah.
meant to distract in another direction.
Or convoluting in some regard. You know, I'm thinking of cultures where if one person in the tribe is grieving, everyone sits, right? And like to grieve in community, or to be seen in whatever you're going through, and to be loved in the messiness, right? Like it's so easy to feel love for yourself when you're doing really well, and it's like to be so messy and broken and to feel the fullness of someone else's love, I think is incredibly reparative.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, beautiful.
That was
it's really beautifully said.
I know. I were all like,
I'm like, whoa.
I
I know, I really felt that. I really felt
know.
that. And I liked what you said also before about like the idea that we don't necessarily have an attention deficit disorder in this country. We have an emotional deficit disorder. I think that that's probably the truest thing that I've heard all month.
Yeah.
You know, it's really true. And I think the idea of COVID, you know, this viral pandemic, in addition to everything else that we're going through, that has really brought that to the surface, right? Because we have not had an opportunity to do anything other than sit in our emotions, share our emotions, be open, be vulnerable. And so it's not something that we can just ignore anymore.
Right. I agree. And I think, you know, as, you know, there might be an ongoing lockdown again. You know, I saw this amazing kind of interview with this doctor this morning about COVID and the vaccine. And one thing that I really took out of it was creating freedom pods. You know, like people that are giving you that emotional, spiritual support right now. And you know, everyone's like saying, "Oh, your pod," and but like let's call it like a freedom pod where we can kind of come together and learn that, you know, we might right now have to be like with only small groups of 4 or 5 or 6, but let's choose them wisely, and let's choose people that support us, and to, you know, understand about how our attention can get chaotic in the fact when fear comes in, and having people that can understand and guide you through that, I think is going to be so important moving through. And I love, Sean, that you've done these meditations. You know, obviously I'm a big component of meditation and using that as a tool. So, you know, I think it's perfect timing that you've created this right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I was pushed in this direction also, you know. So,
yeah, guided by some angel hands back there. Like,
okay, I hope so.
What was that journey like for you, just out of curiosity? Like how, like it feels very much like it was a calling. It wasn't really much of a decision at all.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's, yeah, it was something I felt like, you know, I just had certain moments in my life where things fell apart. And I thought, wow, what's my real legacy here? You know, what have I done in my life? Is there a single, say if I do die, I mean, what will my kids know of me? It was kind of like that type of thought. It was like, okay, I need to sit down. I have like 5 or 6 drafts of books I've written, all sitting on my desk. And the pandemic hit, I thought, let me just start getting some of these things out. And yeah, I felt like it's time in my life where I'm almost 50. So I felt like I need to speak up, say what I have to say, and then I'll, you know, go back to work in a year or two, probably.
Well, you look like you're 35, so
Yeah.
just want to say
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
Yeah,
I
it's
look like I was like 16 when I was 35.
I'm sure you did. Yeah, I think it's really interesting how this time has really enabled us to go inward and to pull out those old drafts, whatever
Mhm.
that metaphorically is for other people.
Mm.
And it's funny that you said legacy. I was on a call with a colleague of mine in Australia last night, his morning, my night, and he asked me after we had this great hour-long conversation about what's happening in this country politically and emotionally and what we're putting our attention on, right? And he said to me, "What is your legacy?" And I had never been asked that specific question before. So it's really interesting that you brought it up. I feel like, when those things happen, I pay attention, right?
I love that he said legacy, actually, because everyone right now is like, how do we serve in this
Or
here
what's your
and now?
purpose, or
Or your
right?
purpose. Everybody says that, but your legacy, I love that
I
approach.
feel like it made me more introspective, like the use of that word. You know how into language I am. The use of that word was really, really impactful for me because it made me pause longer than if he said, what's your purpose, or what are you working on now, or you know.
Right.
So yeah, it was really interesting. And I think asking, talking about attention, asking ourselves those questions, or asking those questions of other people in our little freedom pods, those are
Freedom
the
House.
those are the kinds of conversation and the kind of dialogue that I think gets you off of that track that's very fear-based, that's very focused on what the media is putting out, right? It starts to change that direction. Again, back to what I said before, if your attention has to be focused somewhere, like, you have the choice. So wouldn't you want to
Yeah.
focus on the things that are going to be most important to you?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people recently, complain about media or fake news or, well, how do you know if it's fake or not? I mean, is it partly on us? If you see something that's obviously fake, dismiss it, forget it, turn it off. Uh, don't click again, the next link, like at some point we have to, I think, choose where we're going to place our attention. There needs to be that extra step where you pause and think, okay, wait a second,
Right.
which direction? And there's a lot of those moments in the day.
I think you're right. Lately I've been doing a lot of my writing has been on the inner landscape of your heart and how that can become a reflection of the outer landscape, especially during the confusion and fear what's going on about the media. Every media outlet has an agenda, and people are so divided right now because what they're watching without actually finding the truth within. And I think it's so important. People want to be right, and they will create a story so that they are right, instead of understanding the truth. And that really comes with the attention, the breath, and the inner landscape, and going inward. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think about, our last call was about the in-between times. And I'm working with children who have had these diagnoses with ADHD and dyslexia and all these things. And what I found to be true is for the empaths and the introverts, school was really causing a lot of stress and anxiety. And some of them are off their meds, some of them are thriving. And
Mhm.
we don't realize, particularly with empaths and highly sensitive people, that they're being really other referenced throughout the day. They're getting yanked by all the emotions around them. So this journey of going inward and getting clear on like what's your true north is
yeah.
huge for adults too. But just being able to teach that to children and be like, yeah, that sounds valid to me, what you're experiencing, even if your teacher acted differently. Like there's validation that's also healing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing the work that you're doing, because I feel like you're influencing a whole, the next generation of people who are going to be more of our conscious leaders. They are going to value things differently than what we have known in terms of leadership and all of that.
I feel like, when an empath takes back his or her power, it's like, watch out.
Watch out.
Now you've got the
Exactly.
shaman or the mystic or the healer on board. And I remember watching a TEDx talk that changed me, that was like, be who you needed when you were younger. And I needed to be validated for being highly sensitive and not
Sure.
feeling right with sort of the sick society or broken system, as you mentioned, Sean. Like I needed to be like, no, this really doesn't feel right for a reason.
Yeah, and that's why it's broken. It's the kids who are like the most sensitive, that are most delicate, that are being hurt, and that's really heartbreaking. I mean, that's how. I mean, we talk about opioids, this and that, but the kind of kids who are falling down those paths are not like really bad kids. They're like the sensitive ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
They're the most powerful if they were able to stand in their true
yeah.
power.
I mean, they just need to learn. We don't give them these tools in our education.
They're also like our canaries in the coal mine, right? Like they're going to be the first ones to be like, something's off here. So
Mhm.
it's almost like the people I would say we could learn to listen to.
Yeah.
How great would it be if that kid was then, the shamanic, or brought into some role in the society where they were valued for their
Yeah.
sensitivity rather than being dismissed.
Got to be conformed. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's how it is with most cultures around the country. I mean, sorry, around the world. It's just not here, right? So we're talking
Yeah.
about changing things here.
Yeah.
And then there's a ripple effect that happens, anything that comes out of, and again, this goes back to my conversation with Jay last night, what happens in the US absolutely impacts the rest of the world. And sometimes I think we have blinders on. I can say that from my own experience. Like the number of people that I know outside of the US who reached out in the last week about the election, like, hey, are you okay? We see what's going on. I'm like, wow, when they have elections, I don't even know they're going on, right? Yeah. I mean, that's my own ignorance and the thing that I don't focus on. So that's also something that I'm realizing in this time, that I don't put attention on maybe other people, yes, but not outside of our country. And that's something that I'd like to work on.
That's very true.
Yeah, it's nice.
I love that. It's like it's noticing impact,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just on a grander scale, that how we behave here is being seen, and not just being seen, but is affecting. I've had friends in Canada and France and Spain, in Greece, be like, oh, like I'm feeling you all over there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's back to like the interconnectedness, right? Like this is something that we've been sort of oblivious to. Not everyone, but the vast majority of us have been oblivious to that interconnectedness for a long time. And COVID was finally, like with patient zero, it was the first time where we could like concretely say, oh, I can see this visibly, how it, bounced all around the world and literally impacted every single human being in the entire world.
Right.
We can't deny that anymore.
And we are a world tribe. We just, we have to understand that,
We have a long way to go to get there, but that's
yeah.
doing the good work, right?
Yeah, we're doing, yeah. Like the Kabbalah says, we're doing the good work.
Yeah. So Sean, is there something that through this whole process, like as you've been sort of translating this this ancient Sanskrit text and developing this mobile app, is there something that has really been like a really poignant takeaway or lesson for you that you could share?
Yeah, the points I was making, this idea of happiness, I think, was really big for me in this process. That happiness is a choice. It is something you can achieve. There's a way to like manage one's attention in a way that will lead to happiness. And even if things happen that will make you sad, that's all right. You go into that emotion, move through it, and still you can have happiness. And that was big for me at that point in my life. I felt like I needed like a user manual for life. And I came upon this book. I was like, this is it. I wish I had this when I was like 15. But so yeah, I guess if I had one takeaway, it's that the happiness is a choice. And it takes work and practice. However, there is a method to it.
And I'm also hearing in that sort of an allowance, right? Like instead of being in resistance to what life brings and arguing with reality, which I've found doesn't work very well, to just be an allowance, the path of most allowance in every moment. Okay,
Yeah.
my partner's upset with me right now. Let me lean into that and be curious. Okay, I just got laid off. Let me lean into the gifts of that. Like just being on a path of allowance.
Mhm.
I love that.
Well, that's the flow, right? Like
Mhm.
for me, when you say happiness, I do think it's a choice, but it's not choosing to be happy. I don't think it's the direct correlation. It's the
Yeah.
choosing of being in the stream, right? Like we're all kind of in this stream, but there are people who I think about the visual of people who are like clinging onto the rock and the people who are just like on a little leaf and like going for the ride,
Mhm.
right? Like I want to be on the leaf. I don't want to be
Even if there's
clinging
a
to the
waterfall coming?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you never know like how joyful that experience is going to be after the fear of like falling during the waterfall,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Well, I think,
yeah,
yeah.
I want to go back when you said the delicious melancholy that you experienced.
I love that.
It was so beautifully said, and it made me think of Mark Singer's The Tethered Soul. I don't know if you are familiar with that book.
Mhm.
He talks about the being like, you know, your attention of the experience, either sadness or happiness, to be fully engaged into that moment
Mhm.
brings you a sense of happiness. You said there was something delicious about the melancholy of
Yeah.
the rain and the gray, and we've had a lot of, I mean, we've had a lot of grayness lately, but there's something beautiful in there. So I think that maybe one thing to understand is as you're experiencing these emotions, to fully engage in the experience
Right.
and not
Yeah.
judge the experience.
Yeah. And not want to push through it or say, oh, it's so overcast today. I can't wait for the sun to come out.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm gonna stay in bed and keep covers over and make chili.
But it is being
That's
part of
fun
it.
too, though, you know?
It is fun, yes. It is.
It's like the full human experience, though, right? It's like I
Right.
think in shadow work, Carl Jung said, "I'd rather be whole than good." So it's
Yeah.
like we're given like be happy, be productive, be this, and it's like, well,
Mhm.
sometimes the grief has its wisdom. Sometimes the anger has your back. Sometimes the shame is going to ask you to get in line with your integrity, right?
Mhm.
So, like, I would rather have that full spectrum and a deeper life.
Absolutely.
And
Well,
to your point about that, Freshta, it's like you can't actually know what happiness is or feels like if you don't have the opposite.
exactly, it's that
Right.
duality.
The
And also
duality
you
is
end up like self-sabotaging in a way.
Mhm.
It's like another quote by Carl Jung I like is he says, sentimentality is the mask of brutality. You know, where you think when someone is sentimental and happy all the time, but it's really underneath that shadow side is brutal.
Right.
The other side of that is
Duality.
it's because there is no real emotion that has been integrated. So there are
Right.
these two sides that swing. So I think that's important too. I mean that it's not just a positive outcome to it. There's also a repercussion
Mhm.
if we do choose to go down this other sentimental path, and that's not it either. You know.
Right. Right.
I think there was a great documentary called The Mask You Live In, and it was,
Mhm.
very much about how boys are socialized and sort of the masculine that gets a little imbalanced in our society. And what was really prevalent was like the boys felt like they could either be happy or angry.
Wow.
Mhm.
And underneath all of that was a whole river beneath that, and that they couldn't access it because of their conditioning created a huge dilemma for them and their relationships and their everything.
Yep.
So yeah, it's like be with all of it and
Yeah.
So it's called The Mask You Wear, the
the
documentary?
mask you live in.
Oh, you live in. I'm gonna look into that.
We know what Kelly's going to be watching later today.
While I'm eating chili.
Not for the faint of heart. I was part of the funding of that, and it's difficult, but
Okay.
it's important to be confronted
think
with
so.
it.
Thank you for the warning.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem.
This
Thank
has been
you.
a great conversation. I
Really
really,
has.
really appreciate it.
The book's on Amazon. It's on Kindle, and you can get the. If you catch me in Nyack, I'll sign it for you. Write something nice.
Well, I'll put that in the show notes as well. Thank you.
And
So
then
much.
there's the app will come out. There's an app on the Apple Watch out now. It's for free. You can hear like a meditation, some music. It'll also measure your AQ. It'll measure your attention and give you a score if you want. But that's just really right now on the Apple Watch because it takes pulse. It's based on pulse diagnosis.
Interesting.
There's going to be a proper launch January 1st of the app on the iPhone. And, but before that, you can hear some of the meditations on the SoundCloud link that'll be on your website.
Very cool. And thank you for
That
doing
was only for your listeners.
really,
Exclusive.
really generous to do
I'm
that for
so
us today.
excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for translating something ancient that is both mystic and science, because I love the quote, like, you know, give something from your survival guide because it'll be a page in someone else's survival guide. I see you doing that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Sean, so much.
And if you do get the book, I think the best way to read it is just like one page a day. It's kind
I'm
of
gonna get the book, and I know where you live, so I'll
Okay.
be knocking on your door first.
Okay.
My mentor.
We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.